Hey friends, it's Lauren Taylor. Welcome back to my craft room. I'm so thankful to have you here today. And I'm going to be sharing how I created this Boo to You themed shaker card using the new candy corn glass beads, which I absolutely love. I'm also using the Boo to You stamp set and coordinating dies, the Halloween mug edition dies, and the layered spiderweb stencils. So let's go ahead and get going on our card making today. I'm going to be starting with a sheet of watercolor cardstock, and I'm going to die cut with my largest wonky stitched rectangle, and I cut the center of it out with that pumpkin die from the Boo to You coordinating die set. Since I'm going to be doing some stenciling and ink blending, I'm just using a tool. This is a grip mat to help me keep my paper and stencil in place. And this is what it looks like when the card will be put together. The die cut pumpkin will fit perfectly inside of the window, which will be the back side of my shaker card. I'm going to do some Emboss Resist, and I'm going to be starting with the spider web stencil from the set, and I'm just applying some embossing ink through the stencil onto my stitched rectangle. So I'm just using my ink pad to apply the ink through the stencil right onto the cardstock. I'm checking to make sure I got enough coverage, and it looks pretty good to me, so I'm going to go ahead and use some clear embossing powder to emboss those spider webs on my watercolor cardstock. Once I get it completely covered, I tap off the excess and use my heat gun to melt that embossing powder down, and I will set it aside to give it a little bit of time to cool down and dry before moving on to the next step. Now that I am done, I'm going to clean up my little station here, and I'm going to stamp my images on my pumpkin. So again, the spider web part will be the front of the shaker card, and I'm going to have this adorable Boo to You pumpkin with all of these cute little Halloween images as the background of my shaker. So I'm just using the negative space, the spiderweb frame, to help me with placing my pumpkin and my stamp in the right spot. And I'm using some VersaFine and Onyx Black ink, which is also an ink that I can use for embossing. So once I have the black stamped images onto that pumpkin, I'm going to emboss again with clear embossing powder. So I'm covering all of the images that I just stamped with the clear embossing powder, and then I will again use my heat gun to melt that embossing powder down. I'll set it aside to make sure it cools and dries. Now that my background with the spider webs is ready for the next step, I'm going to place that onto my grip mat, and I went ahead and placed my pumpkin in the center as well, as now it's time for the inking. I wanted my colors to be consistent on the front and back of the shaker, so that's why I'm putting them together on my grip mat and applying the ink. The three colors that I'm using for the ink blending are Mustard Seed Distress Oxide, Carved Pumpkin Distress Oxide, and Picket Fence Distress Ink. I started with the mustard seed on the bottom right hand corner, and then I'm blending it into the carved pumpkin, going back and forth until there's a smooth blend between the two colors. For the top left hand corner, I wanted to leave it white, so I brought in Picket Fence to ink blend better between the white section of my background and the orange. Now I don't want to mix any orange ink onto my Picket Fence ink pad, so I like to apply the ink down to my glass mat and then pick it up with my Dome Foam blender in order to have a nice transition between the colors and not risk getting a dark ink on my white ink pad. Once I'm all done, I'm going to grab a little towel that I keep next to me. It's just a microfiber cloth, and I'm going to pick up the ink off of my embossing powder. So just finding a clean spot on my towel, it does need to go through the wash soon, and picking up any ink that is sitting on top of the embossed spider web, so that way you can see how the emboss resisted the ink, and then doing a quick little cleanup of the pumpkin as well. I'll go ahead and clean up my workstation again. I do my best to try and stay as clean as possible because I seem to just get ink everywhere. And now that the ink is done, I'm going to add a little bit of splatter. This is just a white gold metallic watercolor. I added some water and I'm using a fine brush to pick up that watercolor and just splatter it all over the background. I'm going to go ahead and set these pieces aside to dry. And once it's done, I'm going to add my spiders. So this is the second stencil from the layered spider webs stencil set. And the way that I have my background cut, the die cut, I wanted more spiders to show. So instead of lining it up exactly how it's intended at, the 6 inches and it's perfectly centered, I went ahead and just made it a little wonky so I could get more spiders into my background. I'm using some black tie stencil butter from Crafter's Workshop, and I peeled off my stencil. I did get one spider a little wonky, but that's okay. I know how my card layout is going to be, and it will get covered with a die cut, so not a big deal. I always say we don't make mistakes, we just have opportunities for embellishment, right? While my spiders are drying, I went ahead and die cut a bunch of images from the Halloween Mug Edition dies. I have a pumpkin, a witch's hat, and my broom. I'm just showing you here which dies I used, and then use some brown, yellow, orange, black, and white cardstock to cut all of these out. I actually use scraps for most of these, so it's a great way to use up those scraps that you hoard if you're anything like me. I'm going to assemble my jack-o'-lantern. So I die cut one out of a yellow cardstock, and I die cut the stem of my pumpkin out of the brown craft cardstock. I die cut a second pumpkin out of white and then used the cute little jack-o'-lantern face to cut it out, and then I layered those together. I did sandwich my stem in between the two, but you could glue that right to the front or to the back depending on how you want your pumpkin to look. I'm using my white ink with that little bit of yellowish tint on the Dome Foam blender and just adding a little bit of shadow to my pumpkin. I'm also adding a little bit of yellow to the hat decoration, I guess the little belt around the hat. And I'll also add the same yellow to my broom, again just using the excess ink on my Dome Foam blender from using mustard seed. Once I had the ink on the band of my hat, I went ahead and glued it down to my black witch's hat, and then now I am adding the orange belt buckle on my witch's hat. I love that you can completely customize the colors using the different cardstock with these dies. I just really wanted to do the candy corn look because I absolutely love these new candy corn glass shaker beads and wanted to create a card completely inspired by those colors. Once I have the ink on my broom, I guess I don't know the parts of the broom, but the straw part of the broom, I'm adding the little tie, which was also die cut in some craft ink, and then I am adding the stick of the broom. I feel silly that I don't know the parts of the broom. And I'm adding glue just to the bottom and using my tweezers to help hold that in place while it dries. Now that those 3 pieces are done, I'm going to move on to my sentiment. I'm using the Boo to You sentiment from the Boo to You stamp set. And because I'm going to emboss on black ink, I decided to die cut my sentiment first. So I went ahead and used the die from the coordinating die set. And now I am placing it inside my MISTI, adding some static powder, or anti-static powder I should say, onto my sentiment, adding my embossing ink to my Boo to You sentiment, and then I'm going to use white embossing powder to really make this sentiment pop. I really like the look of white powder on black cardstock, so this is just a great way to add in that pop of color, or pop of white I should say, onto this very colorful card. So just following like I did my emboss resist backgrounds, I'm adding my embossing powder and then using my heat gun to melt that powder down. Again, I really love the look of white embossing powder on black cardstock. My spiders are now dry, so we can move on to creating the shaker background. I have a piece of acetate here and I'm just trimming it down to fit behind that pumpkin window. I'm using some double-sided adhesive tape to add my adhesive behind my background here, my spider webs, and I'm just going around the pumpkin. I'm not being too precise because I just want to make sure my acetate stays in place. This isn't the layer where I'm worried about any of my little shaker bits falling out. So once I get tape all the way around the pumpkin, I went ahead and pulled off all of the release paper, and now I added my acetate window. And this is when I realized that I should have glued my pumpkin to my background before I put the acetate, so I knew it would be perfectly centered and placed where I wanted it. But I'm going to show you what I do when I do this because I do it often. I went ahead and just used some repositionable tape and adhered my pumpkin exactly where it should fit inside the window. I'm adding adhesive to the back side of my pumpkin, and I have my background piece of pattern paper, and I went ahead and glued my pumpkin down, and now you can see it will fit perfectly in my window. So now I need to make the well for my shaker bit. So I'm actually going to make it around my background and not around the acetate. So it will be much easier to add the front of my shaker when I don't have to worry about my little shaker bits falling everywhere. So I have some extra thick foam adhesive and I peeled off both sides of the release paper, and I'm just going around the edge of my die cut, just getting that foam nice and snug without actually going over the pumpkin. So it is attached to the black spiderweb pattern paper that I have here, but again, I'm just curving it around the edge of my pumpkin, and it almost fits perfectly, so I will add one more small piece. And I will say that peeling both sides of the release paper is wonderful when you're trying to curve it around any pieces. So if you're having trouble with your foam adhesive, try this tip. Once I have my well and there's no area for any of my beads to fall out of, I went ahead and grabbed that wonderful candy corn glass shaker beads pack and added some beads inside the well. I'm also going to add some additional foam adhesive around the four sides of my wonky stitched rectangle, so that way there is some stability across the card. Once I have that all on and all of my release paper is taken off, I can go ahead and line up my pumpkin to fit perfectly inside that window, and once I press down, I have my fun shaker card. I have an A2 card base that I'm going to be gluing this to. I was going to use wet glue, but then I thought, let's use my super sturdy tape runner. There is a lot going on this card, and I just want to make sure that it has good adhesion to my card base. I'm going to go ahead and add that right on. I like to line up to the fold of the card for cases like this where I didn't get my cut and score perfect to the A2 card. So now I can just trim off that excess white that you can see from my card base using some large scissors. Once that's done, I have the base of my card all done, so we can move on to adding in these cute little die cut images. I'm going to play around with the scene, knowing that I need to add something to cover up my sad little wonky spider. So I went ahead and placed my pumpkin there. I have my broom and my witch's hat on the left, and then I have my Boo to You sentiment that will be added above my pumpkin. So now that I have a area where all of my images and sentiment are going to go, I'll go ahead and use my wet glue or my liquid adhesive to glue these down. So I have my pumpkin, and then I will glue on my broom, and then my witch's hat, and finally my sentiment. I really like how the background is, again, the colors of our candy corn, but then these pops of black and white I think just really make the card look really nice and great for Halloween. So once all of those are all glued down, I'm actually going to grab one of the clay confetti wheels that Pretty Pink Posh has exclusive to their online shop. There's a lot of excellent clay confetti in here, especially for Halloween. And I really liked those yellow clay confetti circles, so I'm going to use those as some embellishments onto my card. So I went ahead and just put it into a little tray that I have, and I'm using a jewel picker to pick up those yellow clay confetti circles, and I'm going to add them around my card. Once I have them in place where I like them, I really have no rhyme or reason. I just put them where I think they would look nice. I went ahead and picked up each one of them and used my liquid adhesive to add some glue to the card and then drop them right back on again with that jewel picker. And that will finish off my card. Here's a close-up look at how fun this Halloween shaker card turned out that was inspired by the colors of the candy corn glass shaker beads. I hope you found this video inspirational and that you are having absolutely so much fun with your Halloween goodies just like I am from Pretty Pink Posh. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!